breaking news. We understand that Dominic Raab's future will not be determined today. We understand that Downing Street do not intend to say either way whether or not Dominic Raab will be continuing in his job as Justice Secretary, continuing in his job as Deputy Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has had all day to read the QC-KC report into his behaviour, his conduct, those multiple formal complaints that were made. And yet here we are towards the end of the day, and Rishi Sunak has not made a definitive judgment in the way that we had expected that he would. Now, perhaps he's going to refer it to his own ministerial advisor, Lori Magnus, to, as it were, give it the once-over, make a determination to see whether he thinks that Dominic Raab has breached the ministerial code. But what is absolutely clear tonight, Anna, is that there is clearly no absolutely obvious judgment upon which the Prime Minister can rely, no smoking gun that would mean that Dominic Raab was out the door automatically. This case has proved much harder than we might have thought this morning when it wasn't looking good for Dominic Raab. Instead, the Prime Minister clearly weighing up the pros and cons of getting rid of him, the pros and cons of coming down on the sides of the complainants, the pros and cons of holding on to a guy where some might go public about exactly what they allege he did, in the context of Dominic Raab absolutely denying that he ever behaved unprofessionally in front of staff. So a dramatic development, because it does point to the idea that there will be more time to deliberate on Dominic Raab's future, and that Rishi Sunak hasn't been able to come to an easy conclusion, which I think you can only read that as potentially being good news for the Deputy Prime Minister.
That's right, Sam. I guess his supporters will see it as a more nuanced case, the fact that he hasn't been fired straight off the mark. So when might we get it? I mean, do you expect that we will find out early tomorrow morning, or could this just drag on even longer?
Well, I think there's a little bit of reporting left to do as to exactly how Downing Street see it. I think there are two options. Either it could be that the Prime Minister decides that he wants to sleep on it and just needs a bit more time to consider it. But that feels quite unlikely. I mean, it has been at least 5 hours in which the Prime Minister has had the report by Alan Tolley, and he's been able to read it and sort of, as it were, weigh up the nuances of what's going on. But at the same time, it feels like what this points to is that he needs, if he's going to, as it were, clear Dominic Raab, keep him in his job, he needs a second opinion to bolster what will undoubtedly be a backlash from those who feel like they were victims of Dominic Raab's alleged behaviour, from those that think that perhaps the Prime Minister is keeping Dominic Raab in his place for political expediency rather than on the basis of professional conduct. It's a complicated area, but the fact that there's no judgment, when we know that the Prime Minister is perfectly capable of acting swiftly, because he did so when it came to Nadine Zahawi and sacked him hours after that report was published into his tax affairs. He did so with Gavin Williamson. He sacked him, invited him to resign hours after allegations surfaced about his conduct. Rishi Sunak, it's not like he doesn't make quick decisions, but he has clearly decided that the decision today that he's been thinking about, sitting in Downing Street on the basis of that lawyer's report, is too nuanced and too difficult. It does suggest, perhaps, we don't know this definitively, but perhaps he is looking for ways to keep Dominic Raab in his job. And one route could be to refer the whole thing to a second inquiry to get Lori Magnus to look at it. But certainly we don't know whether that's going to happen. That would affect the timing, but no definitive decision either way, which means no departure of Dominic Raab, no reshuffle and no certainty.